Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Eric Davis, continuing our conversations about the cultures of consciousness. Just a little housekeeping. It seems to be working. My nearly weekly request for some reviews on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm trying to get the word out a little bit more, so tell your friends. I think we have a special show here, and I'd like more people to tune into it. I did get some mail feedback. One of the big questions, of course, is how long the show is. Some people love the well-defined hour length. Some people want longer, and I'm going to try to square the circle when I set up my Patreon, so that I'll be able to have additional conversations with people after interviewing them for the full hour. Those will be like extra goodies for the faithful. I also got a critical response from someone I've been communicating with a fair amount. He thought that my conversation with Douglas Rushkoff a couple of weeks ago was he said he felt that there was an avoidance rather than an acknowledgement embrace of the key threats to humanity. And because of that, what could have been an enlightening and necessarily intense conversation about that shared dilemma veered into a kind of coded language that was too vague to be truly bracing or mind expanding. And he went on. He had good reasons for putting his point of view. And I've thought about this issue a lot, because I sometimes listen to people who are inflamed by the urgency of our moment, by all of the apocalyptic signs on the not just even on the horizon, but in our everyday, and the sense of urgency, which kind of pushes beyond the normal protocol of kind of casual conversations or sort of respecting the other person's point of view, and things that are much more temperamentally suited to me. I'm not a firebrand. I've never been a firebrand. And while I can be faulted for that, and I fault myself to some degree for sometimes not standing up for things that I believe in more intensely, because I have a diplomatic, open-minded, conversational kind of mind. I also believe that lots of folks are doing that. And if you're listening to podcasts, if you're paying attention, then I hope that some of the people you're paying attention to are very unwavering in their sense of what the issues are, what the biggest problems are, how urgent some of these problems are. And to my mind, we're all part of the ferment. And just because you're not necessarily completely, pounding the table about species extinction or incipient war or surveillance capitalism or the growing nationalism and xenophobia and climate change, and we're all kind of unfortunately familiar with this litany. It doesn't mean that I'm not passionately invested in certain outcomes and passionately resistant to a lot of contemporary society. It's just that I approach it with a different strategy, which may or may not be effective in the long run, but I think works for some people and doesn't work for others. But it was a very good question. So in any case, also I just wanted to throw out one more time the voicemail number at PRN, at the Progressive Radio Network, which of course has hosted my show for 9 years now, and that number is 862-800-6805, 862-800-6805. So if you want to call and leave a message there, that's great. So recently we had a show where we talked to Jason Louv, who wrote a wonderful book about John Dee. And of course, if you're interested in the matter of John Dee and really the whole tradition of angel magic and the way that it transforms into 20th century occultism, you have to kind of deal with this fundamental issue of like, who are these guys, these angels, these devils? Is there a difference between them? Are they in us? Are they in the structure of the cosmos? And so it kind of brought up this sort of questions that Jason and I didn't go into too much. We were talking about other matters, but it was sort of lingering in the air, this kind of ongoing question about how do we think about these others. We started off this year's podcast with a two-parter with Diana Pasoka about UFOs and aliens and extraterrestrials. So that's another form of this question about higher intelligence. And then I realized that for a forthcoming show we'll be doing in a couple of weeks about about the American poet James Merrill's great book, The Changing Light at Sandover, which is made up in a large part of communications that he and his partner received through the Ouija board over a decades-long period of time, that is very far out, very cosmological, even though he's a very effete and highbrow poet. But we'll talk about Merrill later. But in rereading his book, which I hadn't read since my early 20s, which is astounding, once again, one of the major themes is how this poet and his partner think about these entities who are coming through the Ouija board. Are they real? Are they part of their own minds? There's discussion of collective intelligence. There's discussions of extraterrestrials, of God forms, of devils, of angels. And there's just this whole kind of question of higher intelligence in that form. So these things have all been bubbling around my mind. And we talked last year to Anthony Blake, and we had a wonderful open-ended conversation. He's a great fan of this kind of open-ended conversation where we proceed with a sense of wonder and negative capability rather than a sense of conviction and argument. And he brings this intelligence to bear on through a number of his books, the most recent and probably most formidable of which is A Gymnasium of Beliefs. And, believe me, folks, I almost always read everything that the person, or the whole book. If I'm talking to someone who wrote a book, I might skim a little bit, move a little fast over certain parts I'm familiar with. But it's one of my, it's something I'm devoted to as someone interviewing writers, and a lot of interviewers don't do that, and you can tell, and it's dumb. So I'm going to read the book. In this case, I'm being completely open that I have not read this book because I feel like I need to be kind of on a mountaintop. With like a daily meditation and yoga practice, eating, vegan food to really be able to receive it. It will happen, but that's not going to hold me back because it's such a good time talking to Anthony that we're going to pluck around some of the same ideas because this book, A Gymnasium of Beliefs in Higher Intelligence, is all about this issue, both our own higher intelligence and the forms that higher intelligence have taken in mythology and in science and in technology. So we're going to dive right in. Anthony, thanks so much for joining me again on Expanding Mind.
All right, roll up our sleeves
and dive right in.
Yeah, and all those kind of metaphors. It's quite a formidable, in a way, introduction to all of this. I think I'm going to start with feeling orientation, that we have a question like higher intelligence, and first impulse is to make it something very big and high and far, so to speak. We begin to speculate. But I want to try and begin just with ourselves and feelings about ourselves, because these so much color our understanding, the way we try to make sense of higher possibilities or different possibilities. And even though what I'm going to try and do is going to be done very poorly, I think I always think it's, as you know, I think I mentioned it in our last conversation. My English teacher at school got me very enthused about this saying of G.K. Chesterton, that if a job is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. In other words, it's a job that's worth doing. How we do it is secondary. Because it's the job that's worth doing. That's the idea. Had a wonderful English master. Anyway, it's this, and that is, I sit down, I'm here in front of you, and I think, well, where does my mind come from? Where does my seeing come from? I like to start with these questions, even if I can't answer them. And to add here a reference to my teacher, Bennett, about this, about intelligence, he had a remarkable take on it, or an unusual take about it. He said, intelligence is a substance. And when it comes into us, we are intelligent, but if it doesn't come into us, we are not intelligent. Now, this is quite contrary to the usual view, which says, okay, we people are jolly intelligent creatures and go around doing things. And so ideas of high intelligence are largely a bit of indulgence, a little bit of extra, a bit of a super us. But he had a different view altogether. He said people are not really intelligent at all. It's just when this substance comes into them. Now, another form of that was I'm going away from the immediacy of my experience now, is in the traditional thinking of Giambattista Vico. I've always been impressed by him. As you know, he influenced James Joyce a lot. And he always averred that people were not intelligent, language was intelligent. So in a way, I could start by saying, it's a hypothesis, I'm speaking to you, and people don't ask either, usually. Well, they have some kind of pseudo-scientific explanation. Where does language come from? And they think it's a pseudo question, but I don't. I think it's very, very important because this language enables us to be intelligent. What does that mean? It enables us because you and I can converse. And at a distance, we can create something. And this is extraordinary. It's only possible through language. So language is the really intelligent part of our conversation, if you don't mind me saying so.
No, very much. No, you've already struck many bells in me, and I think I'll respond with two. One to sort of mirror your beginning with our actual situation right now in the body, in this moment, in my apparent awakeness and ability to converse with you. There's all this going on that I of course, have absolutely nothing to do with. I have no responsibility for the capacity of my eyes to see, of the breathing that's going on, mostly not to my awareness of the brightness and freshness of the living moment and how that kind of energizes whatever else I'm doing. And it's actually kind of remarkable because as humans, we have, in that sense, an immediate, obvious example of something like, if not higher intelligence, then at least super intelligence, because I certainly don't know how to do anything like that. And so we're here immediately, if we pay attention to our experience and what we're responsible for and what we're not responsible for, we already have evidence just in this moment of this extraordinary life process that is so much larger and in some ways much more intelligent than my own, intellect, my own personality, my own perception. And I just want to mention one idea that came up in another recent podcast with a permaculturist, a visionary permaculturist named Delvin Sulkinson. And he was talking about how screwed up our ideas about nature are, because from his perspective, nature is just like a super advanced technology, far beyond our human technology. It's incredibly efficient, it's incredibly productive, incredibly creative, it's coming up with new forms. It might move somewhat slowly, but it's an extremely robust piece. And we don't usually think about it. We think of it as the background, the past, the old stuff. And now we're like building up higher levels of intelligence moving forward because of our human intellects. But there's right there, you just go, wait a second, I'm in this incredible world. I have these incredible capacities. I'm not responsible for any of it. So there's some higher intelligence animating this moment, right here and now.
Yeah, well, that's, as you said in your remarks at the beginning, just so much spins into the air, sparkles for us. And this is extremely important. Because there's been this change of attitude towards nature, which is slightly encouraging, which I mean that in our developing civilization, for a time period, it was treated as almost, as a contradiction of words, but inanimate. It was like had no will of its own, there's no intelligence, no sentience of its own. And I've often gone back to the 17th century, where remarkable discoveries were made, like the circulation of blood. How? Through the use of vivisection, operating on living animals. And why was it okay? Because animals didn't have any soul. And so you could do what you liked with it. And actually you could do what you liked with nature because it had no soul. Only we had soul. And this was extended in that period, so that women didn't have souls either. And that attitude still persists in some respects. But now we're it's, I think it's so pleasing now that at least we can do things like appreciate, actually, when scientists began to admit, yes, your dogging cat can actually have emotions. And that was a great breakthrough. It wasn't all that long ago that happened.
It's true.
Accepting that trees can think and all this kind of thing. So we're entering a new phase of communication with nature, and of course it leads to Gaia. And as you know, Gaia, and then, well, we haven't got time for you to go into the background of ideas of the remarkable Russian Vernadsky and his deep ideas about the nature of intelligence in the biosphere. But I want to just stop with an aspect of this nature, since you raised it. There's Gurdjieff had the phrase "great nature," and he had this, very light appreciation of great nature as some kind of presiding intelligence and so on. But then it went further in this, and I'm going to throw it in, since you've provoked it in me, and that is, he had the idea of what he called unconditioned nature. You can treat nature and life as I think the reference you made just now implied, as a kind of superior computer or apparatus or something like this. But there's always something behind this, something which was it's because that you can look at nature as something achieved and established, but there's another part of nature which is what is not yet there, which is almost like the vacuum pulling. And you can ask naive questions like, what's evolution about? You say evolution is a suction. So out of the void, it's like, and he had this image, a word from Sufism called lahut. He translated as the unfathomable, and he talked about sucking on the teats of the lahut. It's on the teats of this nothingness, because it's only from nothingness you could get this impelling pull which would draw evolution out. And I suddenly catch it in a moment, and I see all these forms drawn out of the surface of the earth, climbing and moving and singing and get that sort of thing. So, and the unconditioned nature, and I'm putting it in because it's on my mind now, about he was connected with his own sacred mission, which was to look at forms of worship which would work in this time, and a new sacred image. And his new sacred image would be the unconditioned nature, which has resonances, of course, with Mary and all that resurrection.
Yeah. What it makes me think of is, again, just with meditation or with work with consciousness, when you get to a place where you're not doing anymore, and the language machine isn't really coming up very much. Maybe a little burble in the background, like a bubbling brook, but not really engaging the consciousness in its crafting. And I want to come back to language very much. You had introduced it earlier, but to finish this thought, which is less about language, one discovers sometimes a kind of freshness that is also nothing, or pure potential, perhaps, and so that even in the mind, even in our own experience, we can taste a little bit of that unconditional mind, which is different than unconditional love, although it's related, I think, to that ability to hold the heart open regardless of any content, regardless of reactivity. It's very difficult to do, but I think also in mind, we can taste that. But then if we make it broader and we look at it as a part of a cosmological principle, then we get the sense of the way that the evolution of forms, and even all of the habits of nature, all of the forms, all of the engineered, constructed, repetitious, evolving processes, this iterative weaving that has been going on for millions of years, that it's almost like at the front edge of it, is something extremely different, this unconditioned nature that is open and potential. And we can resonate with that. And my sense is that one of the ways you approach the issue of higher intelligence is that it has to do with developing the capacity to be within, or to merge with, or to encounter that unconditioned nothingness that is also woven into our experience.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, indeed. Listening to you reminded another association, another character, Rudolf Steiner, that he was very attuned to this. He talked about, because our usual mentation is around will as pushing, so there's a sense of forces and pushing. And he said this other world, the spiritual world, is about pulling. You're being pulled, and our response to that has to be, I found it myself, has to be cultivated. Again, I'm referring to Bennett. I rely on his words, because he brought into words many things, very important things. And his just straightforward acknowledgement of it's not only these two, but, there's both the active will and the receptive will. And it's the way the receptive will is far more intelligent, if I might put it that way, than the active will. Because the active will can only start from what you know, so to speak. The receptive will it sort of starts with what you don't know, which is very, very interesting. And first of all, people don't get it, because you think, if you go around and say, well, okay, I've got to be receptive, so what do I do to be receptive? And say, well, look, you don't really do anything. Well, ridiculous. Do I just sit around and just twiddle my thumbs and be receptive? No, but there is a way of doing it, and you catch on, and it's a kind of art form. So this is the practicality of it. How do you connect it? Because if there is, and this comes back to what I'm going to get into now, something which I really don't want to avoid in this conversation, and that's really religion and God and all of that, because there is a side of all this discussion about higher intelligence, which is an aspect of panpsychism, so to speak, this enlarged view of nature, and how to say it, rather than as we were surrounded by it, as you said about the person speaking about nature and its capacities. But there is this too about reaching for, why is there a distance, as well, between what we take to be ourselves and higher intelligence? Because that's the problem. Why is there this? Why does there have to be this distance? We might get into this, but for the moment I just follow the little thread saying, well, if there wasn't that distance, then there would be no drama, there would be no point to us at all. And why is it that? Well, let me but turn to another thing from memory and tradition. That's this old teaching of the great chain of being. This was the idea, from the lowest to the highest, there must have been a unity. So it's like a chain, connecting the lowest to the highest, we happen to be, according to you, placed somewhere along this. So inevitably there must be something above us and something beneath us. And we have this chain connecting us. And that was an idea that Bennett revived in his idea of the scale of essence classes of reciprocal feeding, which he got from Gurdjieff's in the diagram of everything living. Everything's the rocks come into the soil, which goes into the grains, which go into the animals, which goes into people, which then goes into the angels, goes into the cosmic processes. All that organic view of Gurdjieff and so on. But importantly, this is that a fact of our life, let me put it crudely, is that we are a bit stupid. Now, why is that?
Yes, why is that?
We evidently are stupid.
Yeah, no, it's the big conundrum, and yeah, I just wanted one thing that resonated when you talked about the difference between the passive will and the active will. This has been one of my sort of the conundrums of my practice. This
receptive will, not
receptive
passive.
will, receptive. Receptive. Yes. Thanks for that clarification. That's all. That makes all the difference. That one image I have gotten for the receptive will, that process of cultivation you talk about. It's a great word, because you can't make the thing happen. You can't make the connection happen, but you can sort of build the garden or cultivate the mind or the heart. And for me, the model is like, and you can root this in our own, Paleolithic past as nomadic hunter-gatherers. You imagine people moving across the plains, there's lions, whatever. The band stops and it's nighttime. Well, there's always somebody who's staying up and watching. There's always going to be a watcher for these early bands. And what is the mind of that watcher, who's not distracted by telephones or the internet or then they have whatever. You probably don't even have very much elaborate cosmology. They just follow the stars, whatever. Who knows what kind of minds they had. But in any case, if you're a watcher and you're a good watcher, what do? You are absolutely attentive. Mm-hmm. Your intelligence is completely wedded to the moment, and you're waiting as if something else, an entity, a being, a pattern of a creature, a god, is about to come out of the brushes. And that mind, which is you're holding this empty space of nowness that's just pregnant with possibility, and yet you're not making anything happen, but you're waiting so that when you get that first glimpse, a little eye through the leaves, a little flutter of wings, you are there at that moment to receive that and receive that connection. That's sort of what I hear, receptive will. That makes me think of that.
But about this, there's actually a very specific and trained technique in biological science. Have you ever heard of what's called the naturalist trance?
No.
Oh, we was looking at it. It's really amazed me. It was first raised by people like Tinberger and like Lorenz, second by E. Wilson, especially in his book Biophilia, and a very interesting book because the love of life, and his whole book is about how the love of life is essential for real understanding. But anyway, naturalist trance, he actually just, you ought to look at it, you can find it. Looking at, because he talks about his own experience, he became an expert in the ethology of ants. That was his speciality, and he would talk about doing and observing it. And these people, in applying this, they see things, behavior, and which nobody's ever seen before. And he describes it beautifully, precisely. He said, you're sitting down there in their jungle, and you make a kind of imaginary screen, a square like this, and you concentrate on it. You don't put aside, you just keep your knowledge and what you expect, here and so on, and you wait. And his description of it is absolutely stunning, because it's like it begins to unfold before him. But what I like about this school is that they speak about it you can see they picked up elements from indigenous peoples, because who take drugs to enable them to do that, to remain still and attentive. But Wilson and the Western school have done it without drugs. And, to be able to sit still and not go to sleep is quite something. But so it has an explicit discipline in making the frame. You intend within that frame. You have to relax yourself, a very deep relaxation. So it makes it very, very intentional. So I urge you to follow up on the naturalist trance.
Very good, very good. It sounds very, very resonant with what I'm describing. But since we have a little moment here, let's bring back up the question of language. In the same way that I was saying how our body, just the physiological functioning of our body, is already this incredible intelligence that we have nothing to do with. We're not making it happen, and it's incredibly vital. In the same way, or similar way, we as humans can look at language as something that's constituting us. We think, oh, I'm going to express myself through language.
Right. Yeah,
I'm going to find myself through language. I'm going to come up with if we're writers especially, I'm going to come up with my unique way of using language to express something new in the world. Okay, sure, that's fine. But another way of looking at it is like without any request, without any choice, each of us, just as we find ourselves in these little baby bodies and pooping and hunger and crying and boobs and whatever, and we didn't ask for it, and here we are, just in the same way we're being brought up inside of a particular linguistic universe. And that language is already fully functioning. It's already novelty producing, intelligent, full of echoes and allusions and histories, and we have nothing to do with it. And then it begins to sort of colonize our consciousness. It's within that matrix most of the time that we operate, that we find ourselves, we think about things, we make decisions, and it's all borrowed. It's all already there, and it's going to last past us when we die. Like, is that not another marvelous and slightly creepy example of higher intelligence that we deal with every day, but we don't really acknowledge as such?
Oh, yes, as I mentioned Vico, and I want to add just what we're doing now. You see, conversation. Conversation, for me, is miraculous. This would be helpful, but it's an incident, with Mr. Bennett. We were having discussions. So it was great with him because we could just, explore ideas and things and experience and very free. And somebody asked a naive question of, oh, Mr. Bennett, I refer to something, and how do I know that you can understand it in the same way as me? And he came up with what might seem to be a facile response. He said, that's through conscious energy. Because for him, conscious energy was another of these things which maybe come into people and leave them. But in ordinary life, people assume they are already conscious, they have this energy, and Bennett says it's not true. It comes in occasionally. But you see, the word consciousness, I think was first really introduced by John Locke in the 17th century or 18th century. He was the first person to introduce it into English. But it means conscious. It means conscience is to know together, and so I've taken it not in the sometimes it's taken a psychological sense. Consciousness is how you put your psyche together, you hold your psyche together, but also between us, and so consciousness is in language. So that I led to this. Maybe viewers would take it as Spear's conclusion. The language is essentially conscious itself. That is, as you were implying in your introduction here, not we are conscious and we just pick up these things as tools. I hate this word tool. It's a inert thing I can use because I'm intelligent and it's got to obey my will. No, it's already there ahead of us. And so this, and I go back to then the religious example of the extraordinary emphasis in that period, the Age of Revelation, which includes what I call the monotheistic religions in particular, but also involved in some way Buddha. Age of Revelation is all about the word. You notice it. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, especially Islam, you get the revelation with you. Talk just now about, you get into a non-verbal state of consciousness, that's true. But in that period, in the beginning was the word was with God, and the word was God. This kind of thing. This identification of the word with God was actually, that was the key revelation. You see what I mean? And so what you're talking about now is the phenomenology. And we can then get puzzled about this, who made it. But one part of who made it, I want to throw in here hastily, I'm afraid, is to do with getting away from, because there are sort of top-down explanations, spiritual explanations for this, but there's another component which is more organic and natural, and that's because of conversation. It's just this, language grows out of conversation. It grows out of being used. You see, it doesn't have to be imparted from above, but once something started, it naturally grows. And so this is the other side of our human experience for me, Eric. I mean, which is it was heartbreaking at the time, this antagonism, disintegration, disruption, xenophobia, and all these things you say about it. But there's also the miracle which is available at every hand, like talking to you. I mean, we have different views, different eyes, different experience. I don't know what images in your mind or mine. We're having this conversation. That means we're in the same world.
Yes.
That's miraculous. I mean, people want the miracles. Here it is. No? Wow. And that's the receiving organ, conversation.
Very much so. No, I love that idea of the emergence of language through human interaction, and then it grows and grows until it's essentially has a life of its own that changes us and we change it, but there's a relationality there. And one way of looking at the importance of the logos or the word in these revealed traditions is that, for better or worse, human beings are clearly intimately involved in the evolution of the planet, at least in this point in the game, and maybe not always to the benefit of the planet. But leaving that aside, that if we see that happening on a larger scale, that at some point this, in some ways, deeply human construct, though not exclusively human, animals have their own forms of language and things, but we got our own twist on it. It's clearly complex and very rich, that at a certain point the very force of evolution of life enters into that field and it becomes lively, it becomes aware and awake. And I think it's really key, that distinction you drew between the resistance to the idea of the tool, that we come up in this technological society. They want us to think in terms of the tool. They want us to think of language as a tool. Like, we used it back in the day to coordinate human social behavior so we could da-da-da-da. And you're like, come on, man. The first time we coordinated anything, somebody made a joke, or they sang a song, or they sang a song together, or they made a rhythm, or they made a dance. The play is already in there. And that's where this whole kind of poetics becomes really important. Like, even though poetry can be seen as sort of an effete, useless side practice.
Oh, no. The poets are the antennae of the antenna of the race.
Yes.
Somebody said.
Yeah, that was Pound said that.
Ezra Pound, good old Ezra Pound, in spite of being, he was anti-Semitic, but what incredible insights he had. I'm just looking at the clock now. I'm really getting anxious, Eric, because we go so much. We could go on for 10 hours at least. Oh my God!
Well, we'll enjoy our hour.
All right. I was just looking at some of my old articles I wrote about Bennett and his ideas, and he was it's a shifting gear, rather, proponent of what he called demiurgic intelligence.
What did he mean by that?
The word demiurge it goes back to the Greeks. You can find it in the writings of Plato and Aristotle. And it was, in a way, in a nutshell, I could say first definition is it was higher intelligence involved in the fabrication of the universe. So it was the maker. So you can imagine it. It's a very rough kind of operation, but you see, the word angel is, derives from the meaning messenger, but the demiurge is a worker, and sometimes they even translate it as a worker for the people. But a worker, and clearly Bennett would attach himself more to the worker, being in the work and all this kind of thing, as being productive and active and doing something. But this came into our Western civilization culture as I say, the craftsman. And it's very interesting because in the literature or the stories, so to speak, there was not always, but implicit or around, there was embedded in it somehow this kind of distinction. You see, the demiurge is the creator, but he or it works with already existing material. So in tradition, he's represented by the potter. And all the old stories about a potter are really stories about the demiurge, because he's the fastener. And this is going back to other things we can't go into, how the making of pots was absolutely drastically important in human life, because it was regarded as sacred. It was amazing. But he said, then we got into the age of revelation with the word, and see what happens there. You start with nothing. And this is incredible part of a change in human thought. There's a time people always started with something, so the demiurge was a super being, and the super craftsman who made things, because they saw people making things. So we made the universe. Then they said, oh, that's not it, because who made the material? You've got to go deeper than that. So they came up with this, which is it is the creation out of nothing, and that they became divine. That is the truly divine. That's the truly spiritual, and the religion always then had this battle about you get into the craftsman, the demiurge, is a lesser thing. Then this, and I'm rushing to try and put this in, I'm trying to restrain myself to be nice, be careful about this. I did mention last time too, all this play between these two forces in which like there is the creator in Gnosticism is a tyrant who has enclosed us in his dream. And compassionate God is beyond that. And so the Gnostics have to wake up to the dream world created by the tyrant to encounter the savior or the higher woman, the higher intelligence, and then be free into the compassion. So this is a bit of a meander around this idea of the demiurge, but it's definitely this intermediary stage. And to impose on you a little bit more, just refresh my mind that and in Gurdjieff and in Bennett, Gurdjieff makes a joke about it in some sense, all the archangels and so on. Bennett has a similar view. That intelligence can only be concerned with the generality. So, say in terms of human evolution, if we accept some kind of agency like this, it's only concerned with the evolution, so to speak, of the species and the biosphere. But what belongs properly to religion is beyond that, and is exemplified by the thing in Matthew, it is, not a sparrow falls, but that the Lord thy God knoweth it. Now that's the infinite God, and it's not the demiurge.
Yeah.
But Bennett still said, we're on this planet in these conditions, in this crisis, and we need the demiurgic intelligence.
Right. Well, we certainly seem to have minted them. I mean, I'm glad you actually, the sort of Gnostic cosmology popped up, because it's something that comes up again and again on the podcast. And I know for a lot of my listeners, it's a very powerful model. And it's one of the reasons it's so powerful is that in our sort of contemporary crisis moment, one of the best analogies I think we have for, let's say, the role that corporations play, not only in organizing the world, but in shaping our minds and our perceptions. The role of growing role of artificial intelligence. Talk about another kind of intelligence, and how do we think about these things? So there's definitely an archonic dimension or a demiurgic dimension to our reality, and yet I agree with you in the same way that short of a civilizational collapse where some people manage to survive and return to the old ways in some manner, that before we get to that point, there's still something about the capacity for a collective engineered intelligence to deal with problems. And I do think that is still a possibility. It's just there's a lot of other. It's a war of demiurges, or a struggle, an agon of demiurges out there. So I think it's quite wonderful you brought up that. In fact, even that very passage I was reading today about the sparrows,
really?
and that distinction between the singularity, of the person, and I think that's a really important part of conversation, because if conversation is an actual creative engine, a forge of novelty, an element of an emerging higher mind, then a conversation, it's always about these singularities that are engaging, these personalities with their own unique histories. And so that means that you can't just take the general view, because we're not, as personalities and as conversationalists, we're not just subservient to these larger patterns. We are also involved in weaving that higher mind through our own singularity, the engagement of our singularities through language and affect and emotion. So,
oh God, you always set me off. I mean, it's kind of like I'm drowning you. It's just incredible, because one of the things I want to throw in about this in your description, I mean, it's coming up with words we use and so on. It's all part of this. It's not that our words are right or true or anything, but just this is the action, this languaging and so on. But what we just mentioned in terms of energies is by calling on Bennett's terminology, the difference between the creative and the unitive energy, because that's the whole point about the demiurge is creative, but beyond the image is love. And Bennett called it more abstractly unitive energy, but it's very peculiar properties. And, intellectually you could study it, but it's a very, very hard and subtle thing. And you need something like Ibn Arabi to help you to grasp it, because it means this incredible acceptance of individuality everywhere, where you don't put it into a blob. And that's for us impossible. That's why love is impossible, and where it's reflected in human life is usually a degenerate form of it. So there's definitely that. Then, as you were speaking, that's the other thing I wanted to throw in, just an incredible moment. This is a fantasy came into my mind, but I'm just reporting it. So it's looking, there's Eric, me, we're talking, and I was saying, so, well, Eric could disappear, I could disappear, but the conversation could go on. I said, I really felt that, because people think the solid thing is Eric and the solid thing is Tony, or we're actually over here. But I think, well, the really solid thing is the conversation. But this is interesting, because I think this is emerging in physics. And just refer, I don't know if you see the book, but it's quite a useful reference for being Information and Nature Reality.
All right, Paul Davies.
Paul Davies, of course, a lovely chap. But I was really struck. I got it just out of, I ought to read it, and I started reading it, and I looked at the end, and there you got an essay at the end by a theologian talking about the body of Christ. And I thought, what? And it's like the real, I mean, saying, for me, what I call the real spiritual people, in a sense, fighting back in all of this, and all this stuff which they've been cowering and pretend, we're not really like this. We don't really believe in all this stuff about the resurrection and, going up into heaven and all this stuff. But thank God, it's like a weird thing, without being too stupid about this. All this, the modern physics has come along and provided tools for people to start thinking in that way.
Well, or at least inviting people to recognize